Hi, my name is Jane Scarf, and I'm coming to you today from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And I want to talk to you about the Canadian Bill of Rights and your business. How to protect your business from being shut down and, ultimately going bankrupt because of emergency orders. Actually, emergency bylaws. First and foremost, I'd like you to look at Section 1 of the Bill of Rights. It states life, liberty, and security of person, and enjoyment of property, and not to be deprived thereof except by the due process of law. That's where your property rights are contained, and that's where you have a right to run your business without undue interference by the state. And certainly a bylaw requirement that you close your center down, which violates that right severely, is not acceptable under the principles and the provisions of that law. If you look at Section 2, it says no. At no time are the rights to be abridged or interfered in any way. Except through due process of Parliament, an Act of Parliament that expressly states they're withdrawing those rights. That's the only legal way that a right can be violated. And in this case, our rights are very severely being violated. Our right to property, our right to protest, our right to religious freedom. And in Section 1, you also have the right to voluntary informed consent for medical procedure. So forced mask, PCR, vaccine, and quarantine are all contrary to that section of the Canadian Bill of Rights. So it's a little complicated when you're trying to protect your business rights, because the public health, I don't believe, are covered by the Canadian Bill of Rights directly. The mayor is covered, so we do have some coverage in some way to assert our rights. But in terms of directly with the 22 Section 22, because they're being imposed by public health that are supposed to be provincial, and they're just nebulous who they are and what they're doing. And it's not clear whether they're peace officers either. They act as though they are, that they have extraordinary power, they would project to you, that they have the right to come in your building and inspect at any time and to pass out any number of directives and fines and all of that if you don't comply, yada, yada, yada. That's stepping up a pretty high degree. So it would appear as though they're peace officers, but legally I can't find any basis for them to be considered to be peace officers. So that's not resolved yet. However, as I said, the policies themselves are brought in through the mayor. They're supported by council, so you have some capacity to use the Canadian Bill of Rights there, because the mayors are under there in terms of enforcement, and that's certainly an enforcement item, the lockdown. And then what's more urgent is for people to understand how to deal with warrants involved in possessing your property based on these bylaws, which is completely ridiculous. And that's being done, and JPs are signing them, and that's also ridiculous, because they don't have the power to override your rights. They're mentioned in the criminal code. That means justice of the peace are designated, regulated under the criminal code. Therefore, Bill of Rights regulates what they do. So they're making a warrant allowing your property to be confiscated based on a bylaw. I don't think so. That's not going to hold up. And injunction, same thing. And they're also twisting the legality that was already there. We had provision to deal with real dangers, any kind of real dangers. So if somebody actually had a severe medical condition that was contagious and refused to attend to it and continued to go around people, we could use the criminal justice system for that. There could be a warrant for their arrest, and then they're picked up, and then they're dealt with by force in terms of addressing their medical issues. So we didn't need these emergency bylaws to deal with anything like that, and those are real dangers you're dealing with. Now, what they've done is they turned around and they're trying to use these provisions that we set up to use for real dangers for just risk of danger, because all of this stuff with COVID is risk. It's risk based. It's not reality based. It's models and predictions and percentages and all that stuff. Whereas the Section 22 and the injunctions and all that were meant to deal with real risks. Like you could smell gas coming in out of a building and the owners won't let you in. Well, you go and get a warrant to go in, and whatever you have to do to address that, we had the authority to do that. And so this is just a way of loosening up that power, kind of extending the power of the state to be in prediction. And one way I can use to describe what prediction is and risk, let's say that you lose your job for whatever reason. Somebody could realistically say that puts you at risk of stealing, because you have to keep up with your expenses, your children, your mortgage, all that. So there's a risk that you might steal. So what are we going to do? Pass a law that says anybody that loses their job will be picked up and put in jail because there's a risk that they might steal? No, that's not the way our system works. We don't impose sanctions on people based on risks. It's stupid. Like it's totally unfounded in our legal history, in our common law history. It's not there. And even in the public health history, it's not there. We did not have to do those kinds of things. People cooperate when there's a communicable disease and we have to get on it. People cooperate. Voluntary contact tracing, for example. Extra provisions with long-term health care providers. Voluntarily done. Don't need a force. And like I say, where there is an actual breakout and there's proof of a breakout, if there's no cooperation, there was room for force. So where there's actual danger, there was room for force. So now, the way I would suggest people deal with warrants, Canadian Bill of Rights, immediate. And I recommend that you not get in a debate about whose science is better. Is there a virus or isn't there? How dangerous is it? It's PCR test, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's a red herring. That's not what the discussion is. The discussion is, do they have the authority to override our rights or not? That's the discussion, not is there a good enough reason to override our rights? Because if we get in that conversation, we're accepting that they do have the authority to override our rights if they think they have a good enough reason. But in reality, in law, they do not. If they need us to participate with them, they can ask for our cooperation and we'll give it. We've always done it. We've got rid of hundreds of communicable diseases, a lot more serious than the flu-like virus they've been freaking out over for the past year. So we didn't need to go to this level of law enforcement to deal with this. And the devastation, don't even get me started on the devastation that these so-called, medical measures have created. So that's what you want to do. You want to don't discuss the science. That's a red herring. That's getting you off the topic. That's not the topic. The topic is, do they have a right to override your rights or do they not? And my contention is they do not. Because if you look at Section 1 of the Bill of Rights, it outlines your fundamental rights, and in Section 2 it says no flip and flying way can they override them. In no circumstances. They can't abrogate, abridge, anything, anytime, or authorize any abrogation or abridgment, except through a federal act of Parliament that expressly gives authority to override your rights. So what that would look like is, for example, the religious rights. It would say, bill whatever is being proposed that will be modifying or eliminating your right to religious expression. And then it has to get voted on 3 times, public consultation, and royal assent, and discussion. A lot of discussion. It takes years to do that. They can't just whack them out like they've been doing with these bylaws. And they don't have the authority to, like the province doesn't have authority to extend police power, which they've tried to do. No, they do not. The extension of police power is a federal responsibility, so it would have to be a federal act. And luckily, the federal government can't do that. They can't engage police against the public in violation of their rights. Because if you look at the Emergency Act, in the preamble, 3rd paragraph, it says, in the emergency planning, they have to respect the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian Bill of Rights, and the International Covenant on Social and Political Rights, and they cannot abridge these rights even in the case of a national emergency. So they're not legally, federal government is not legally allowed to extend police power to martial law or to bring in the military to establish martial law. We have no legal provision in Canada, and of course the province has no authority to bring in the army directly or to extend police power. They can't do that. And if they start extending the power of the bylaw and so on, they're covered under the Canadian Bill of Rights as well, because if anything to do with enforcement on an issue that is federal, and don't forget quarantine, the control of communicable disease is a federal, not provincial, exclusive jurisdiction. Look it up. It's expressly stated there. Definition or the purpose of the Quarantine Act is controlling communicable disease. So lockdown is a form of quarantine, and that 14-day whatever isolation, quarantine. Mask is part of the medical control of communicable disease. So all of this should be on the federal level, and the federal government, when they're responding to an emergency, cannot bring in martial law. So that's it, that's all. You're in really good shape in terms of fighting for your business, to keep them open, and to only have to deal with recommendations and voluntary requests for any kind of accommodation to try and to control communicable disease. So have a look at the Canadian Bill of Rights, and if you want to attend a Zoom meeting tonight on this topic, where there will be a number of businesses that have stayed open using the Canadian Bill of Rights, you can contact me at mjslegalservices@yahoo.com, and I'll send you the Zoom link. Good afternoon.